Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the library. I'm Michael Bellicosa. I'm head of adult programming at the library, which means I get to put together all of these kind of great programs, working with a lot of partners in the community, like the League of Women Voters. One thing that I noticed is very interesting. This is the first in-person legislator dialogue programs we've had here. We've had a couple of them on Zoom during you-know-what, but this is the first time we've had it in person, so it should be a great session. I'm just going to turn this over to my friend from the League, Pam Clem. She's going to introduce the electoral officials here and the program. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you to the Wilton Library for co-sponsoring this, and thank you to our legislators. I'm going to just take one, just in terms of the structure here, I'm going to introduce our legislators. They'll each have a couple minutes to sort of speak directly about what their priorities are, what issues are particularly animating and motivating them for this legislative cycle, any bills that they are particularly eager to see get over the line this session. And then we're basically going to open it up for questions informally. There's a couple mics. We can pass them around. We've had a few questions that have come in to us prior to the session. I'll start with the inevitable League question about League priorities. But basically, we expect it to be quite informal, and so feel free to ask whatever questions are on your mind, or whatever issues or bills that you'd like to particularly hear about. So I'll start with Ceci. Ceci is our state senator. She's representing the constituents of the 26th State Senate District, which covers Wilton, Westport, Ridgefield, Reading, Darien, Stamford, and parts of Weston. This is her first term with the Connecticut State Assembly. She grew up in Stamford, started her family in Norwalk before moving to raise 3 children in Wilton, where they went through the Wilton public school system. She's worked in New Canaan and Darien and volunteered in Westport and throughout the 26th district. She holds a master's degree in social work from Columbia University. Prior to serving in our state assembly, Ceci worked in both the private and nonprofit sectors in both professional and volunteer capacities. As a licensed master social worker, she worked with children and youth in a psychiatric hospital. She led the growth of educational opportunity programs at the Horizon National Student Enrichment Program for 5 years before serving as executive director of Person to Person. She also led Sandy Hook Promise as interim executive director, supporting gun violence prevention programs, including the important Know the Signs program, helping to create safer communities for students and families. Within State Senate, she serves as chair of the Children's Committee, vice chair of the Higher Education and Employment Committee, and a member of the Energy and Technology, Human Services, and Judiciary Committees. Keith Denning is our state representative. He represents the constituents of House District 42, which now comprises all of Wilton, along with portions of New Canaan and Ridgefield. There are maps in the back if you're curious about our districts. Keith is also serving his first term with the Connecticut State Assembly. He was born and raised in Indiana, one of 8 children. He attended Indiana Purdue University, earning a nursing degree, and then went on to Wake Forest for his certification as a certified registered nurse and anesthetist. He spent much of his professional medical career in Cincinnati, where he lived with his wife, Christine, for 35 years. He's volunteered with medical missions, with Operation Smile and the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, and has provided medical care throughout the world. He currently lives in Wilton, having moved to Connecticut to be closer to his son, daughter-in-law, and 3 grandchildren. He serves on the Transportation, Public Health and Insurance, and Real Estate committees. We welcome them both and thank them for making time to join us this evening. Ceci, Ceci, why don't you take it first to just say any remarks that you'd like to open with, and then go to Keith, and then we'll go to questions. Thank you.
Well, first off, thank you so much for coming. Like, we didn't know if this was going to happen tonight because of the weather, and you're the hardy few who decided to come out to spite. So be careful about black ice on the way home, okay? Just promise. Some bills that I'm working on. Well, first off, do you want just a quick little recap of what it's like up in Hartford? I mean, that's way more fun, right? So you can pitch in here. We don't have to do single.
Well, you talk about the Senate, I'll talk about the House.
Okay, it's closer.
Because we've been told that the opposition of the Republicans and the enemy is the Senate. So I don't know that that's true. We seem to get along really well.
We get along great. So it's really fun, and it's really exciting, and it's exhausting, and it's a ton of information all at once. And it's a little like hazing because they don't actually teach you anything. They just sort of, at least in the Senate, in the House, maybe they do, but they just like throw you in and then you're the chair of a committee. And they don't use Robert's Rules of Orders, they use the Mason's rules, which I didn't know. And so there's different little slight differences, but it is exciting and it's fun and it's a lot of learning and a lot of people to get to know, and it is a gorgeous, gorgeous building, and it is an enormous honor to be there. I can't even tell you what an honor it is. And it's funny because all the lobbyists know your name. Do they know your name too? Evidently, they all get photographs so that they can call you, "Hello, Senator." And so it's supposed to puff you up so that you like talk to them. But it's true. So they all get these photograph sheets that they have to study. Anyway, it's really very interesting. And I also learned that we've had lots of public hearings in children's and higher ed, and I testified in housing this morning. But what I learned is the public hearings, really about 40% of the bills get changed or killed or reformatted somehow because the public has come to give testimony. So when you sign up for testimony, when you provide testimony, whether you do it in person or you do it on Zoom or you do it just through the written word, it's really, really important to do that because it really does impact how bills are written. There were 4,000 bills that were submitted, and you have literally 10 days between the 4th when we were signed in and the 13th when the bills closed at 5 o'clock. 4,000 bills were put in by all the legislators, and they all get sort of weaned down into committee, and then they go. It's a whole process. But I will stop talking and let Keith tell you.
Okay. Thank you to the library and the League of Women Voters. I've been told never turn down the opportunity to talk to a microphone. I don't know that that's wise or true. Yes, it is an honor to serve. It is disorienting when you get into the House. There are 98, when I started, 98 Democrats. There are 27 committees, and you have a ranking member from both parties or from the Senate and from the House, because we do our hearings and our meetings together, which is one of the unique things about Connecticut. And then we also have the ranking members from the opposition party, which are the Republicans. Because there's 27 committees and 98 Democrats, I do not have any chairs. I am not a vice chair. And so my responsibility is limited to attending hearings and attending meetings. After the bills are submitted, you have up these 10 days where anybody can submit in a long session anything they choose. And so that's why we have 4,000 bills proposed this year. Next year, on a short session, only bills that affect the budget and come out of committee can be considered. And so it's every other year that you can submit your own. Once these bills are channeled to their particular committees, the leadership takes over as to what will be heard, what will not be heard, what will be discussed, what will be sidelined, what will be moved to another. So this is a little different for me because as not having any official title, I was not involved in any of those decisions. What I do have is the ability to connect with the chairs, the vice chairs, and leadership and say, this is very important to me, I'd like to see it move through. And so our voice becomes your voice through the leadership. And then after they decide what they will and will not hear, we vote on that. At that point, some of your bills may never be picked up again because the leadership decided that they weren't going to do it this year. And then once those will be going to committee, and they will decide what will go to hearing. And so it's an interesting process. It's not always as clean as what you might think it would be, but the process seems to work. After we vote through hearing, they'll go back and they'll be what they call sifted again, and those bills will be decided by leadership as to what they will try to move forward on, what they will decide to pass on. And this will be basically working with House members and Senate members as to what individual members will support. Remember, the goal is never to bring a vote to the floor that will fail. And I know that seems antithetical to a democracy, but they want to have this all worked out before it gets to the floor so that everybody knows and counts the votes and it's ready to go. And that's how democracy works in Connecticut.
So I'll tell you a little bit about the bills that I've been working on. So I'm working on SB 2, which is the Senate bill that's coming out of the Children's Committee. So I'm the chair of the Children's Committee, and my head has pretty much been down in the past 6 weeks on children's, because we have to get all our bills out by Thursday. And so, because we're one of the early committees. So SB 2, which is an act concerning the mental, physical, and emotional wellness of children. And essentially what we're trying to do here is increase the amount of access children have, and can also down the stream, adults, on to licensed social workers and mental health services. So we're doing that by lowering licensure costs, adding staffing in the licensure office to get through quicker. We're also setting up an office of healthcare, of mental health advocate, which has never happened before, so that we can make sure that both providers and users can get to an advocate and make things work better. And then we are also, the Office of the Behavioral Health Advocate. And then I'm going to be working on the comprehensive needs of children. That's a task force that will look at what happened in the pandemic, but also look across the state with a lot of different input on looking at what the needs of children are, where we're falling short, where we can do more. So that is part of what I'm doing. And then the other bills I'm working on are food for all. We just had the governor did an e-certification on food for children because we had money coming through ARPA that was finished by the end of the December. And there were a lot of children who were not eating because of inflation, the costs, even the cost of free and reduced price lunch. It was too much for people, and the kids weren't eating. And the governor used some ARPA funding to make sure that we could get food for all the children through the rest of this year. And then we're looking at what are the costs and how can we make sure that everyone gets fed going forward. So that will still include federal reimbursements for food for kids in poverty areas, but also how do we make sure that we're getting access to all the children. So that's something we're working on. A few other bills that I'm following are pedestrian safety. There's been a lot in the district. There have been people who've been hurt in streets, crossing streets, so we're looking at pedestrian safety. Online privacy and protections specifically for children. There's a data privacy bill that I'm talking with one of the other senators on. Drug affordability, energy. We all know energy costs have gone up exponentially. And then medical aid in dying, composting, and then this doesn't sound this big of a deal, but transcripts, withholding transcripts, trying to get a bill through so that if a student drops out of school and can't afford to pay for their, say they've got some fees and they can't pay it, an employer will the school will have to release the transcript to an employer so the employer can hire them so then they can pay off their bills. It's just a way of making sure we move people forward and have them be successful. And then there are a lot of housing bills and a grief counseling bill, which is just to set up a study to look at all the ways that COVID impacted children, and not just COVID, but also gun violence, and also the fact that they had to stay home during school during COVID. And so we're looking at setting up a grief counseling study with all the grief counselors around the state. So those are all, a lot of those are children's bills. So you can see my head's really been down in that.
Very good. I am on transportation, public health, and insurance and real estate. One of the ways that you can get yourself very well educated at the beginning of a session and your first time in the House is to talk to the lobbyists. I know everybody thinks that's a dirty word, but they actually have a wealth of information to give you a good background. You don't have to listen to everything that they're proposing, but they will give you a good background. So for example, I learned that in the insurance market, anybody who has a self-insured plan that may be managed by an insurance company does not fall under the regulation of the state of Connecticut. So if your employer covers your insurance directly and it's managed by United Healthcare, we have no control over it. So we, as the state of Connecticut, only really have control over 30% of the market or 11% of the population, which if you think about it, is a very small part. So if we mandate an insurance, something to be covered by insurance, we only affect those 30% of the plans and 11% of the population. Now, whether we have caught up or whether we're behind is one of the things that I want to look into, because the private plans don't have to share with the state the information as to what they cover. So if somebody comes to us and we have a bill before us which covers PANDAS, which I don't know if you're familiar with, it's a neurological disease that comes usually after an infection. And they're looking for somebody to cover IVIG treatments, which are about $8,000 to $10,000 a treatment. And they want us to mandate the coverage under those plans. And so we have to think about, if we mandate this for those plans, what do we do to the rest of the insurance market? How do we keep those people who are buying in that market affordable? How do we, you learn a lot as to how you want to do it and how you want to mandate. What we're learning is that we would like to have a cost analysis before any mandate, so we fully understand what we do to the rest of the insurance market. In transportation, the motorcycle helmet law has come back. We are highly concerned with the number of wrong-way deaths on highways last year. I think there were 23 people who died. There's something systemically wrong with our road designs that we're having this problem, and we're looking at different ways to solve it. We also are getting ready for the amount of money that's coming into the federal government, to how we want to spend that money and where we want to rebuild our rails, our bridges, our trains, and how we want to proportion that money. One of the things that we talked about today on insurance is there's a bill that, there's what they call a buy-in or buyback program. So for example, if a drug is supposed to go off market, and a generic company wants to make it, the original maker can come in and pay off that generic company to not make it so they can continue to charge the higher rates. We'd like to strike that so that you could not do that. Another bill that went through public health yesterday, this has been like the 10th hearing we've had on it, is the right to die by medical assistance. I find it compelling that of all the issues that were brought to me by people just knocking on doors, this was the single most issue that people came to me and said, how are you going to vote on this? And it's very, very important to people in my district what my decision was. So we'll see if that goes through and we get it to the floor this year, and we put some good safeguards around it. We're hoping we can get it passed. Other bills, when you win the House, it's kind of like getting a fish tank. And you can put some fish in it, and you know some are going to die. But if you don't put fish in it, you never know how they're going to die or how to keep them from dying the next time. So I put 10 bills in through the process. One of them, which kind of surprised me that's going through rather quickly, is a bill on human terramation, which is a form of taking care of disposition of human bodies by human composting. It is done out in Vermont, or it's done in Vermont now. It's just became legal in New York, Washington, Oregon, and California also have it legalized. It decreases fossil fuel use because you don't use any of the gas to cremate the body. You also don't use land for cemeteries. And you return about a cubic yard of earth, which can go to memorial gardens or reforestation projects, or you can do whatever you want with it. This moved through the environmental committee very, very quickly and actually may become law before I was ever ready for it to become law, but we'll see where that goes. Other bills range the gamut. Some we will never see because the sifters have decided we're not going to address that this year. The other thing we have to consider is the governor's budget always comes out. We've been presented with the budget, and you'll notice that when we voted in early February, it was almost unanimous with just 4 people not voting to stay with the 27 safeguards towards bonding fund limits and spending caps. We increased the amount of our rainy day fund from 15% to 18%, and we also voted that any extra money that comes in will go half to refilling the rainy day up to the 18%. The other half will go down paying the debt. So there's a real strong movement within the General Assembly as a whole to be very fiscally responsible, which I personally am very grateful for. But there will be some pushback from some members who want to spend more money, particularly on education.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take the league prerogative and ask the first question, and it will probably not surprise you that it's about voting.
Oh, yeah, I was going to mention that.
So following the passage of the ballot referendum last November, which authorized the state assembly to enact legislation enabling Connecticut voters to utilize early voting, there are currently more than 10 bills with a fairly wide range of specifics on what that will look like. Where, when, how many days of early voting will be available to Connecticut voters. Can you tell us what specific provisions you each are looking for to see in early voting legislation, and what you think needs to happen to get that legislation over the line?
So Stephanie Thomas, who was the representative here, who's the Secretary of the State now, she recommended 10 days of voting. And that's based on a study that she did and a lot of input that she got from around the country, and a tremendous amount of talking with the registrars of voters and around the state. So that's her recommendation. I've heard, and Keith, I know that you were focusing on this too, I've heard up to 14 days, I've heard a month. There's a big concern around who's going to pay for it, how is it going to be funded, how is it going to look on the rollout. And I think what Stephanie's idea was to include weekends and weekdays so that we cover all the different permutations of when someone might be available to vote. So that's where that is, and I know Keith will probably add more to that. But the other piece of it is the no excuse absentee ballot. So that is a question. We have to, let's see, I think it had to be a 2/3 majority to get onto the ballot, to get a referendum last time, and it didn't pass. So now in order to get it onto, I believe it's the 2024 ballot, we have to have you told me a something majority, a simple majority?
Yes.
This time. So that's going to be up for discussion as well, to get the no excuse absentee ballot, as well as determine what the voting days are going to look like.
Thank you. So Stephanie does propose 10. Most of the people that I've spoken to in the House would like to see at least 14 days. There are 3 bills that they are focusing on, 10, 14, and 18, that they're trying to flesh out as they write this. 2 weekends is important. No absentee ballot. We definitely want to move forward on that. One of the bills that I proposed was ranked choice voting. That bill has been moved to another discussion along with the governor. He also wants to have a discussion on ranked choice voting. So that will be coming up, but I don't think we'll be moving forward on that this session. I think they'll start with a discussion on that to begin with. I see the outcome will be 14 days. Cost is very paramount. Whatever we decide, we have to come up with the funding, and this is our job, to fund for new voting tabulators throughout the state. When whatever we decide should have the ability to do ranked choice voting if we decide to have it.
Thank you. And just to clarify, these are three different things. Early voting is one set of issues with its own bill. No excuse absentee ballot is separate on a slower train, and ranked choice voting is yet a third. So we are good now to take questions from you. So raise your hand, and I'm just going to walk around with the mic. Make sure you're sort of close to it.
Okay. My name is James McSweeney. I live on Chicken Street. The issue that concerns me is the limited liability of the police. Now, that came up for consideration by the legislature, I think last year, the year before, and as usual, was kicked down, the can was kicked down the road. But we're getting to the end of the road, and I think it's a very important question that should be addressed, because there is a crisis amongst the police. The limited liability is a crux of part of the crisis. Pardon me? Well, all right, the question, okay, so the question is, this has been kicked down the road, but it's very important to the police, and it's very important for recruiting. So I think it's an issue that eventually will have to be addressed. And like a lot of things, it's better to address it earlier than later because of the problems of recruitment and retention. So I know that you're probably not intimately familiar with something like that because you're new, but I bring it to your attention, and I hope that that does not get kicked down the road, because the consequences are severe and multiple. Thank you.
Thank you. So Keith had mentioned how it works in the House, and in the Senate it's a little bit different. The Senate, you have Republican caucus rooms and a Senate and a Democratic caucus rooms, and all the bills, every single one of them that are going to go to the chamber, get discussed in the caucus room before they go out to the chamber. So while I have not had any eyes on that bill right now or any conversation around that, I have heard a lot of conversation around why people are not joining the services, you know, the police, the state police, the local police, and fire, that there's an EMTs. There's just a really big need across the entire state and across the country, I've heard, for all of the people who are the bedrock of our communities. So I can't speak right now, but I appreciate you mentioning, I mean, I can't speak to it because I haven't seen it yet, but I appreciate you bringing it up, and I will be looking for it.
Thank you. This is a great question. One of the things we've learned this session following the pandemic, and there's a lot of reasons for it, but the majority of baby boomers retired way before their time. They stepped away versus going back to the workforce. A lot of new people have decided that they don't want to work the way that our lifestyle was. And so we have a huge labor problem in Connecticut. And whether it be police, teachers, nurses, and construction workers, pick it, retail, restaurant workers, there is a shortage of all of these people. And everybody feels that they're being picked on for one way or the other. I was trying to find this online. I did a lot of research on the police limited liability and talked with a lot of my Republican friends to find out, was this really an issue? And yes, it has been for a lot of people my age and older. They felt that they were threatened by this law, that they would not be protected. The law actually only requires that if they are completely out of line, and I forget the two words, it's like malice and negligence, that they perform their duty, that are they to be held criminally liable. or civilly liable. Otherwise, the towns take on the same liability. No policeman in the state has had this held against them, because for the most part, the police in the state do a really good job of what they do. And there's no, among the Liberal caucus, the Democrats, with the police reports that we've seen in the news of policemen who have not done their jobs well, who were malicious and negligent, there's very little movement to curb this at this particular point. I don't know where it's going to go in the future. Right now, for the most part, the small towns don't have a problem filling their roles. It's more the state. The state has offered a higher pay this year, so we're going to see if that works. The whole study of employment and why people left their jobs and what they're concerned about is something that we're paying attention to. I'm particularly paying this attention to the police because I do want police accountability, but I don't want the police to feel like they're at risk for doing their job in the way that they were trained. Does that answer your question?
They do now. They do now feel that.
I know. I hear you. They do. But again, I don't see, because it's not been used, that no policeman has been held to this level. No one has been sued. That I don't see this as being something that's going to change right now in the state of Connecticut with all the national reports of police abuse that are going on. I think this is going to have to play itself out and see how it actually reacts. And I think the new police coming in are going to learn to adapt to it differently than the policemen who were retiring, who felt it to be much more of a threat. And so this is a game changer. We want responsible policemen. We also want policemen. We want people to protect and to serve. And so this balance of how we bring forth good policemen without allowing bad policemen to be able to flourish is something that we're going to continue to struggle with. I think as long as we have policemen, because we're all human. And humans make mistakes, humans break rules, humans forget the guidelines. But at this point, politically, I do not see the state legislature moving on this at all.
Thank you. Other questions?
No, I just on the two.
Talk into the mic so that we can
Okay.
catch you on
the
the.
two issues that you brought up before, aid in dying and early voting. Do each of you have a position on those two bills as to number of days and in aid in dying? Do you think we're to the point where we have the controls necessary?
Well, aid in dying has been brought up for 20 years, I believe? It's been a long time. And last session, they thought they had the votes to get it out, and they didn't. Where I stand on it is I will support it because there are a lot of guardrails. Dr. Saud Anwar, who is a state senator, he was on Public Health last year. He listened to all of their the arguments against it, and they rewrote the bill in such a way as to try to incorporate the arguments. A lot of guardrails, estimations by evaluations by mental health professionals, multiple doctors' evaluations. They're very specific, and you sit on public health, so you can add to that. But they were very specific around it. I believe the biggest issue is from a religious standpoint, and that's where the pushback comes of not wanting just from religious views. So we'll see where it goes. I sit on judiciary. Keith sits on public health. If it comes out of public health, which I expect it will go to judiciary, and that would be where I can have a voice.
I actually co-sponsored this bill.
Oh, I did too. I put a bill in too.
Okay.
But there were
no,
6
so
of
I mean,
them.
No, I mean, I signed on. So another
did
thing
too.
you should learn,
I
if
did
you
too.
did not write a bill, and it's not your bill, you can, up until the time it is signed by the governor, co-sponsor a bill. So you can wait until to find out whether the bill even passes or not, and then you can say, I'm going to co-sponsor a bill. So you have to learn all the games. So I went ahead because I believe in this. I co-sponsored the bill. The added safeguard that they added this year was you had to be a resident of Connecticut for 1 year. I think that's a fine addition. With my healthcare experience, and I think most people who've had any healthcare experience with, especially with hospice, is that aid in medical dying can be just an extension. It's not an or, it's not hospice or, it's hospice and. And so if hospice can take care of people and manage their discomfort and keep them comfortable and take them where they want to go and they're happy, I support that 100%. However, there are people that hospice cannot do what they'd like to do for. And if people choose this with these safeguards, I support people's right to make this choice. The other question she had was, I'm sorry, I forgot your other question.
Bob.
How many days on voting?
Oh, I support 2 weeks.
Yeah, I don't know. I would rather have the 14 days, the 2 weeks, but looking at it from a financial impact on towns, and also in some towns, registrars are only part-time. So I would be okay with 10, but I would prefer 14. And as far as the bills, remember I mentioned before there were like 4,000 bills that came through. So I think there were 6 medical aid in dying because I put in one of the bills. But those little bills that we put in, it's sort of like your fish analogy to see how the bill works through the system. They all get, put together under one bill. So
Right, a committee may take 5 or 6 bills and put them under one bill, and what was assigned to your number, HB, meaning a House bill, SB, meaning a Senate bill, will become a committee bill. And it will be assigned a number, usually to the ranking member of that particular committee. And so if you're egoic about this and you really care that your bill goes through, you may lose out. I'm much more interested in that we get things done. I don't really care whose name is on it, right?
I 100% agree.
Hello, my name is Shen Hui, and I'm just trying to understand. I'm very new to politics, but I just want to know, since we already have the no excuse absentee ballot, right? And what's the reason that we need early voting?
I'm sorry, what's the reason?
We don't have the no excuse absentee ballot now.
We don't have it.
With the end of COVID executive orders, that expired.
Okay.
So when people realized that we were one of the only 4 states that did not have early voting, it was put to a population for an open vote. And overwhelmingly, the people of Connecticut decided that they do want to have early voting. The question was always, how many days? Do you have off hours? Do you have evenings? Do you have early mornings? How it's to be broken up, and that's what we're trying to decide now. We would, however, like to add early no excuse absentee voting, but it has to go through referendum. And so that's where we are in that process.
So that means in probably 2024, both options will be
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. All right. So my second question would be then, do you know how much the budget will be for the early voting?
It's really early to know.
It's
They
really
have
early.
to, so after the bill gets raised out of committee and then sent to, it's joint favorable to the floor, then it would be sent, if it's a bill that has any financial component to it, then it would go to appropriations. So then appropriations does the work along with the Office of Budget Management, and they come up with the cost of that bill. And so we don't know yet, is essentially the answer.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions from the floor? I'm going to ask one that came in before tonight. Currently, the state assesses a 1% meals tax on restaurants, I understand, and the proceeds go to the general fund, and the general fund then sends it back to, there's a bill on the floor now that the general fund sends it back to municipalities, from the state of tourism. Do you have a position on this initiative?
I would like to see this bill eliminated. I would like to see this tax go away.
1% meal tax.
Yeah, I am against hidden taxes that sneak around different activities that are used to raise money for the general fund. I would much rather we be much more open and clarify where the money's coming from and where it's going and make it very simple and straightforward. So I would do away with this. I don't know, it's kind of like the car tax. There's an awful lot of people in my district who hate the car tax because they don't understand why they're paying property tax on a car that they've already bought, they've already owned. And all this money goes right back to the municipalities for the most part. And with that, the municipalities can kind of hide what their true budget is because they're using the car tax to for extra income. Now, I'm sure the Board of Selectmen can talk more clearly about how this helps them, but I just think that in Connecticut, where we actually have the right to say to our selectmen each year to go before the budget and say, I don't approve this budget, this is not what we wanted. This is something that I really admire about the state of Connecticut, and with the car tax, we don't have that option.
I
It may not
can't,
be a bill that,
I haven't looked at the bill, I haven't weighed in on it, I don't even know what committee it's in. Do you know what
No, I'm not
committee
sure
it's
which
in?
committee it's in.
So I have to look at it.
Again, the 4,000, we don't know where they've all been whittled down. We do have what they call office hours, which I attend, which each of the committees
You do?
meets. You don't have office hours?
No.
Wow. Well,
Well, but
you're in the
I'm
Senate.
but I'm a chair and a vice chair, and I sit on 4 other
So we
committees.
sit on, so all in the House, each committee will have what they call office hours. Anybody can Zoom in, and they basically tell you what their priorities are for their particular committee for that particular year. And then you can ask questions, you can say, I'm concerned about this, this is not gonna work for me, and you're allowed to give a little bit of feedback to that committee via those office hours as to how you, what you feel is important. Again, though, just because it's a bill doesn't mean it made it to where you wanted it to go. It may have died somewhere off in the corner, or somebody decided that they weren't just going to talk about it.
I'm jealous.
Okay. You're invited to our office hour.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't think they'd like you. Just told me we're the enemy.
I have been told that. So, if you have any other questions?
Another one that came in advance is about labor relations, basically. There's a bill, a predictive scheduling bill for workers that, if enacted, would require employers in certain industries, including also hospitality and retail, to have a predicted schedule in advance for workers. Could you each share your views on that bill?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the idea being, if you don't have a predictive schedule, you can't schedule childcare, you can't schedule your life, your errands, your car repairs, your doctor appointments. So the idea is, if you have predictive scheduling, which is not for someone who is working, not always working the same hours, put a certain amount of hours in advance, the weeks in advance that you have to know. So I've talked to restaurant owners about this, and I've talked to restaurant workers about this. And I don't have an opinion formed yet because it's still too early and I'm still collecting information. But the restaurant owners were very unhappy about the idea because the ebb and flow of the season, the ebb and flow of the weather, things that impact a restaurant. If there's predictive scheduling, then they may not be able to manage their restaurant in that way. And interestingly, I heard from a worker in a restaurant that she did not want it because, oh no, that's a different bill. Sorry, I was conflating them. I heard from a worker that she didn't want. Oh, this was about tips. Never mind. Sorry, different bill. So yeah, so I'm still learning about it and getting information.
As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, this applies to employers over 500 employees. That puts a whole different spin on it for me. So I'm watching this bill to find out how does this manage with the independent employer of a Burger King, a McDonald's, who may be a franchisee? Are they going to be affected under this particular bill? It seems to me that if you can have 500 employees, that you would want to have a fairly robust scheduling protocol anyway. And so it makes sense that your workers should be able to have some reliability in a schedule. But I'm watching to see this bill, and I'm also watching to see what the penalties are for what happens if they don't do it, or how they expect the employee to be rewarded. So this was one that'll probably go down to the wire.
Jack Ceci, I live at 6 Sugar Bush Court, Wilton. I was the one that wrote the question, and I'm not a restaurant owner or anything like that, but I have friends that are in the industry, and they've indicated if you had a franchise, let's say a Burger King, you're a franchisee, the way the bill is written, it would apply to you, because I guess they look at the global company as
And that's what I'm following, to find out how this final language is going to be written.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Heather Borden-Hervé. I'm asking this question both as a resident and a member of the media for Good Morning Wilton. Today there was, and it's still going on, a very highly anticipated and much watched committee meeting for housing. I know you had a meeting at pretty much at the same time today, but have either of you watched it? What was your reaction to what you might have heard or watched? And out of any of the housing legislation that's been proposed, knowing the way that you probably have heard a lot from your constituents, is there anything that you want to say to the constituents in your responses to what's been proposed legislatively?
So yes, did I watch it? I've been watching it. I watched it from when it turned on at 11 o'clock, the public hearing. There were 276 people registered to speak. It is, as a matter of fact, Peter's still waiting for his time to come up. Oh, it's past midnight, so he has time, so we don't have to get him out of here. But the point is that 276 people are registered to speak, and what I've been impressed by the Housing Committee, and I should say, I registered to speak, and I spoke, but essentially it was to speak against bill, I think it was HB 6633, and it is the bill that is coming from Fair Share, and it's a formula for towns, but ultimately, the reason I did not think it was a good bill is because if within 10 years you haven't made your fair share growth of homes, of affordable homes, every single acre, it can have up to 20 housing units on it. And so that is not, I mean, we know that in this district alone, in Reading and in Weston, we will 100% not have the number of housing that they expect within 10 years in this bill, and they will not have it most likely in any of the towns except perhaps Stamford. And so there was no way I could vote for that bill, and I wanted to give testimony, but I didn't speak to it for more than a couple of sentences because the head of P&Z in Westport, who I've been talking with a lot about housing and the way planning and zoning works, Danielle Dobin, she's really quite brilliant. I ceded my time to her. So I spoke and said I was against it, and then, but I was fascinated by the bills that are in front of housing because it is a problem. We do need to build housing. We cannot grow the state in business if we do not grow our housing stock. And so the bills that are coming through there, I have not seen yet one that I really want to get behind, but I did want to hear the conversations that were taking place. So I was on the Zoom from 11 o'clock until I turned off my computer to come here. And concurrently, I was on the Human Services Zoom because so I had two Zooms, plus I was writing emails. So the Human Services Zoom, and I don't want to pull it away, but I just want to say there are certain things that are in front of Human Services One, for example, is the ability to repair your own wheelchair. People who are wheelchair bound that cannot get out of bed if their wheelchair doesn't work. And so there were multiple people speaking to that. And it was kind of heart-wrenching. So I'll turn it over to you for housing.
Housing is the third rail of Connecticut politics. I'm glad you brought it up. I learned about housing when I ran for this office. We have a unique situation in Connecticut, mostly because we live between Boston and New York City, and our land values are very, very high. And while everybody appreciates the rural atmosphere of having 2 4-acre lots with very, controlled, strict zoning, those market pressures make our housing stock very, very, very expensive. They just do. So we have a choice. And I hear from a lot of people, they don't want to become the New Rochelle of New York City. They don't want to have high rises. They don't want to have high density. They don't want their schools overwhelmed. They don't want their roads overwhelmed. They like the idea of affordable housing, but they really don't know where they want it in their community. If I were to point this out to anybody in Loveland and say, where could we build it? Or let's say Amazon wants to come and put a warehouse here because everybody said they want jobs. I can guarantee you that there is not a spot in Wilton that wants an Amazon warehouse. They would just say it would destroy the town. It wouldn't happen. I've already talked with the management at ASML. They're doing a $200 million expansion of their company that's here in Wilton. And we should all appreciate this because this is a Norwegian company that makes the machines, that make the microchips, that drive our best and finest computers and technology in the world. Our ASML makes the machines that the US government does not want the Chinese to have. This is how important this company is. Most of the people who work at ASML cannot afford to live here. It's too expensive. We are building an apartment complex down by them, which will accommodate some of them, but not all of them. And furthermore, they don't like traveling an hour and a half to work any more than you or I do. So the question is, how do we resolve affordable housing? And then on the state level, we have a whole division of people coming out every year going to school from nursing degrees, technology degrees, teaching degrees. They want to stay in the state, but they can't afford a house. They can get a job, we have jobs, but they don't pay enough to pay for a house. So where do they go? They leave the state. So this is a problem that we're not fixing by ignoring it. We are continuing a problem where the young people cannot afford a house because they're too expensive, and then as you get to be my age and you stop working and you realize you still have the same tax bill, you realize you can't afford that house either. And so you either get out and find somebody and move away, because you can't move. If I wanted to stay in Wilton, there is no place to go for me to downsize. There just isn't. It's the same thing for New Canaan, the same thing for Ridgefield. The opportunity for housing is very, very small. I believe the answer to making Connecticut a wealthy and robust state economy in the future is to rebuild our building stock somewhere. And that's up to the citizens to decide. So do we have places in Wilton where we could have affordable housing with higher density and with more stories? I mean, you're talking 5- and 6-story buildings with maybe 100, 200 occupancies, mostly rental, because affordability with ownership is going to be very difficult, again, with the land prices. There's the bill on the work ride share or work ride live. They want to mandate around train stations. Well, part of me says that makes sense. Well, if you're going to have a train there and you have a stop there already, why not build more affordable housing so that people could come there, could live there, we could have first floor residential. And if we do that now, we can define by borders where we want that to occur versus letting developers come in and pull the 830G rule and saying, we're just going to do it anyway. So my question, I've asked this to leadership, is what would it take for you to define an area for high density in your town? Or are you completely, totally against it? And if they are, I will fight that battle in Hartford for you and say, our town doesn't want it, we're not going to do it. But I think it's a better decision for our towns to say, we're open to it. These are the places we're open to it. Don't tell us how to do it. Don't make us do these perimeters or half mile or quarter mile, but we'll find ways and we'll come up with a plan and we'll work it forward. There are two places, like, for example, Wire Mill District, it's in Reading. But if we were to help, if we were to get the Reading, Ridgefield, Wilton, and Weston community together to get that facility dealt with as far as the toxic, what I call bonding on that facility, and open that up to affordable housing and redistricting as a retail center hub at a train station there, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars in development that's going to come to this area, and the jobs that would follow, and the opportunities if we allow that to happen. So my other question is to leadership is, we have a train station and it gives horrible service. I mean, if you want to go there, if you want to go into the city on the weekend, there's like every 3 hours a train comes by. Well, that's like Petticoat Junction. That's not train service for mass transit. You can tell the people who know what Petticoat Junction is. And so my question to leadership is, how many trains would it take per day coming by that you would allow higher density housing in your area? For example, would you allow 500 units to be built around your train station if it gave you greater service? Or should we bypass Wilton and just build a train station up near Georgetown and then close Cannondale? I mean, these are the kind of common sense decisions that if we want to work to build the state economy, find housing for people who want to either downsize or move into their positions, and build a functioning mass transit system, it only makes sense that we have to work with these three together. And that may mean that if a town, any town who's on the rail says, I don't want mass transit here, well, your train may stop twice a day, but all the other towns may get hourly service. And so these are the things that I challenge the people of Connecticut to look at. As far as all the bills proposed, they're just like 830G. They're too broad, they're too tough, they don't deal with the individual problems. What I don't see is the challenge, and this is on the local level. This is on the local planning and zoning commissions to decide what they want their towns to look like in 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years, and suffer the consequences of those decisions, knowing if they don't grow their tax base, if they don't grow their grand scale, it's only going to become more expensive to live here because your costs are going to continue to go up, and your grand scale will stay the same, and your taxes will never be relieved. And so these are things that I want individual towns to talk about and see if we can get common resolution on.
So Keith has given you sort of a little more dystopic view of our area. I'm going to give you a little more positive one. So in Westport right now, they are actually doing 830G, affordable housing, planning. Are they doing it in huge scale? No. Have they done some apartment buildings? Yes. But they are also doing a lot of pocket communities, and they're taking a look at where does the state own land that they're really not using, and how can we take that state-owned land? Because what is the biggest cost in building housing? It is the land. So if we can take state-owned land and turn that into housing, that is a terrific idea. As a matter of fact, Steve Hudspeth, I'm sure a lot of people know Steve. Steve gave testimony today on that very idea, that we have land around Wilton that was ceded to the state, taken by eminent domain, because we were going to build Super 7, but we didn't build Super 7. So now we've got this land. Why can't we build on that land? Especially because some of it is over by the DMV, up the hill there, in that area, and it's near transit. We've got the Merit 7 transit. We could do that. So it's about how do we be creative? How do we think about it and really move it forward without at the same time imposing new rules or laws or statutes that aren't going to get us further along? So to go back up to Ridgefield for a second, Ridgefield and Branchville and Reading, the Gilbert and Sullivan building, and the old Gilbert and Bennett building. Sorry, what?
Gilbert
Yeah,
Sullivan,
Gilbert
yeah.
Sullivan. Sorry, that's just where it is in my brain. Let's do a dance. So the Gilbert and Bennett building, Jim Himes, Congressman Himes, just gave. We had an announcement a couple weeks ago about sewer study. And the whole idea behind this sewer study is to see if what they built when they thought that the Gilbert and Bennett building was going to be renovated, they built a pretty substantial sewer system up there. And so the Georgetown area uses that sewer system, Meadow Ridge uses that sewer system, and if we rebuild Gilbert and Bennett, if we mitigate the brownfields and actually get that done, which, by the way, they haven't been able to do because it's been tied up in legal wrangling, which I think, in talking with the first select woman up in Reading, I think they're getting very close to having that finished. Rudy Marconi, the first select person out of Ridgefield, Julia Pemberton from Reading, they're talking about how can they together with that Branchville station, with the train, with the remediation of Gilbert and Bennett, what is the sewer capacity? That's hence the study. And can they get that all done, knowing that they've dedicated a substantial amount of it to Meadow Ridge? So if that's the case, then Keith's comment about the trains, then we take it to that next step. If we renovate that, that is going to be an economic driver for that area. It is going to have not just the housing in Gilbert and Bennett, but also housing in Branchville, because Rudy Marconi is working on that. And so there is, and then let's give some props to Wilton. We've got that building that's going up there. We have the one at the bottom of Sharp Hill. And because of the plan of conservation and development and the master planning that's coming as a result of that, we're looking at what does downtown Wilton look like. And there are opportunities there, with this new bridge that we now are going to have going over to the train station that can be live, work, ride development. That is, and I've seen some of, I'm sure you all have. I read Good Morning Wilton. I've seen the diagrams and the pictures of the potential building in Wilton Center. So I do think there are things going. I do believe that the select people know that this has to happen. And there are plans going forward to building more. But is it going to happen overnight? No. And is it going to happen because it's being pushed upon the towns? No, it's not. So that was a very long answer. Yeah.
I'd like to make an observation about the terrain in Wilton. I've heard that Wilton has the most private wells of any town in Connecticut.
Makes sense.
And the reason is that Wilton basically has a tremendous amount of ledge on either side of the valley. And of course, the valley contains the largest aquifer in Connecticut, the Cannondale Aquifer. So you can't just snap your fingers and say, well, 2 acres, 4 acres. It all depends on what's underneath the ground. And a lot of it is ledge. And Wilton found out about that when they tried to run a lateral from Route 7 up to the school, because they had to go through all that ledge. So that's a physical limiting factor. And from my long experience in Wilton, the development, for some reason or other, naturally goes along the valley. And Gilbert and Gilbert and Bennett is the same situation. It's right along the valley. And at the junction of 7 and 33, there's been proposal to do a big development there, but nothing's happened in years. I don't know what's going on there. So I think the other people in the state have to realize that you just can't snap your fingers and put the house on 1.5 acres because you can't have any, there's a water problem and a sewage problem.
And your point about the water is really important because in other towns too, you see a great deal of flooding because of the water tables and overbuilding, building all the way to the edges of lots. So we do. All of those things are incredibly important when you're planning.
I agree. It's just that, again, as economic driver, to wait 20 or 30 years, it'll be too late. Most of the boomers will be gone by then. The population will have shifted. If we haven't brought new people in to start their careers and live their lives, then who is going to live after us? And what is their housing going to look like? And how are they going to get to work? And so now is the time for us to answer those questions, at least think about them, knowing that change is always imminent. And what we can control, we should try to control. Like I said, that's the biggest problem with saying you have to have the whole thing idea of a half-mile radius around a train station is ludicrous for exactly what you talked about. And it makes much more sense for the towns to decide for themselves where they could do affordable, higher density housing near their train stations so that people would use them, and then figure out how they could get their communities best served. For example, if we did build, let's say Cannondale has the most opportunity in my eyes to become a higher density housing area with a village feel with first floor retail, then running a bus service from down Ridgefield Road to pick up people who want to catch the train there in the morning, knowing that it's not going to come just every hour and a half or 2 hours, then we will have actually more distribution of people using our mass transit system, helping us with our environment, with housing not being a problem. And so far, we've always been able to do it with our schools. I see our school board directors in the back. So I think this is time for, like she said, to think creatively outside of the box and see what we can come up with.
Thank you.
I had just a comment about the, since all my years of working the elections, I just wanted to bring up the point that an early vote is not the same as an absentee ballot, because an absentee ballot, if you've made a mistake on it, that vote is not counted. And if you haven't signed your 2 envelopes and put them in the envelope and done all the, jumped through the hoops, your ballot's gotten rejected. So it's not the same, and I'm really glad that they're doing early voting because I've worked ABs a long time, and it's so sad to have to reject ballots. So, but I do feel like 14 days is it's a huge amount of time. To go from one day, I feel like a week is, more than adequate. And I was curious if there's thoughts of using the town clerk instead, because I know a number of registrars in these small towns are part-time, and even ours are part-time. But the town clerks are usually a full-time position, and they help with ABs currently. So, and then my other question is about any environmental bills that you know of, and because that's where my heart's at. Thank you.
Okay. So yes, there has been talk about using town clerks. And there have been other conversations which, obviously they're still at the very beginning stages of, are there ways in smaller towns, I mean, not the Wilton size, but smaller towns in other parts of the state, where they can have one polling place for 2 towns so that they can share the costs, but all of it's up for grabs, all of it's under conversation. So there's no answer there. As far as bills on the environment, yes. So we're supposed to have a zero carbon future. That's the goal, 2040, where Connecticut is going to have all state power from clean energy. So I do sit on the Energy and Technology Committee. Something that was just announced last week was that they announced the hydrogen study group, the Clean Hydrogen Study Group, and the president Raddick of UConn is actually a very internationally known scientist, and she's the new president of UConn for the past, I guess, 18 months or 2 years. And she is, they're looking at putting hydrogen growth, working with Pratt and Whitney, and doing hydrogen up in at UConn, studying that for clean hydrogen and how are they going to use that as one of our energy sources. So that's in the works. And then there's a number, I thought I brought them all, but I didn't. There is a public act concerning climate change mitigation. Oh, that was last year, sorry. This year is an act concerning zero carbon emissions. And it's HB 6397. And it would be to declare a climate emergency and recognize climate change as a public health and environmental justice emergency. It would require the state to increase requests for federal funds to address climate change mitigation, and requires the state treasurer to divest from companies that derive more than 10% of the state's revenues from the sale of fossil fuels. So those are, and then there's a lot of composting and aerobic, is it aerobic or anaerobic? I can't remember. Aerobic, thank you.
Okay.
There is a new facility built, and they're looking at how do we get 30% of our vegetative waste out of the, not landfills anymore, because I said landfills the other night and someone corrected me. So I guess we don't have landfills in Connecticut anymore, but they're trucking waste out of the state. So how do we pull that 30%, which creates methane, which is 25% worse than carbon dioxide? So there are a lot of conversations around this. There's also a lot of conversation around clean energy. And what are we actually doing, and how do we set it up? And how do we set it up just not for now, but for the future? And there is Hydro-Quebec, which is coming out of Canada, obviously, Hydro-Quebec. Just recently, I was talking with the head of the Department of Environmental and Energy Protection, DEEP. I was talking with the commissioner, and she was telling me that there has been a lot of resistance to bringing that power from Hydro-Quebec, but for some reason, things are looking really good, and so we're going to be able to be pulling electricity from there so that will increase the amount of electricity we have in our grid. So with hydropower, with air, wind turbines, Millstone, sorry. Thank you. Sorry? Yes. My brain is just all of a sudden went completely blank. Nuclear, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, Mr. Sweeney. Yeah. So 40% of our power comes from Millstone. And that is really quite, did you know that? That we have 40% nuclear energy in Connecticut? So that's just one component, along with the wind turbines, the Hydro-Quebec, and there's something else that I'm forgetting. What am I forgetting? Another form of energy. So solar,
Yeah,
thank you, the
we're
big
way
one.
behind. We're
Solar.
actually way behind.
Yeah, we
in our
are. I
solar.
know, but see, he's Mr. Negative, and I'm like, yes, we're going to do this thing. So, okay, you go. Tell them
Okay,
now how
I'm gonna
behind we are.
back to my dystopic world.
Okay.
Actually, I do see hope. That's why I'm doing this job. Everything is coming through environmental, and this is not going to be we get off oil and we get off gas and we go to one other thing. It's going to be, the money coming down from the Inflation Reduction Act has yet to hit the pipeline. So the money that's going to help us convert to electric cars, charging stations. One of the things that we really have to pay attention to is the electrical grid. If we haven't been noticing that it's been failing, they're talking about rolling brownouts this summer here in Connecticut. We need to talk about rebuilding our electrical grids. It's going to be bringing hydrogen, or it's hydrogen into the state. In what form and how that's going to be has yet to be determined. The market's going to have a lot to do with this, as well as the investments that private industry and private citizens put in. For example, all the money that's coming down to convert out of gas into electric cookware, as well as geothermal. I know that I can't afford, to get rid of my oil tank. But when my oil furnace, my Thermo King dies, which I've been told it has like a lifetime warranty, which means it's going to be around for a while. When it goes, I will have a geothermal put in because I will be able to replace it with 30% tax credit plus anything that the state gives. And plus it will become more affordable by that time as more and more people buy into it. The market's going to make it more cheaply available. And so what we are behind on is solar. We are geographically challenged. Our tree lines cost us in so many ways. We pay to cut down our trees. We pay for storm damage during electrical outages. And our trees are hazards for our roads, and yet everybody loves the Connecticut tree line. And so it's a cuts both ways kind of a blessing. But one of the things we talked about with public transportation is that when we redo roads and highways, we should do away with these invasive species. And there's somebody who works in the Yukon in their agricultural division, and they are advocating that we plant only native species, hardwoods that would grow more up than out, and things that would control our underbrush better and save us money in the long term. So we're going to continue to meet with them, but I cannot tell you, including my terramation bill, which has to do with doing away with any kind of carbon loss when you die. Everything that we're looking at in the House, and I believe in the Senate, is going through that environmental impact.
Bob Carney, question on that subject. Will Haskell introduced a bill to allow Tesla dealerships in Connecticut. Right now, that's not possible because of the lobbying of the traditional car dealerships. One, do you favor what Will proposed? And two, do you think it has any chance?
In honor of Will, I proposed the same bill, and I was greeted with about the same receptivity. The bill is not going anywhere forward this year. I will be, if I win again, I will be re-entering it on the long session and seeing what we can do in the Transportation Department next year on a short session, because I honestly believe that there's so many new electric car companies coming on, and their market is not going to be the traditional marketplace of a dealership, that if we don't do this, we're going to hurt ourselves environmentally as well as economically.
So I looked to do the same bill and was told that it's not going to go anywhere. I was told flat out, don't spend your time on it.
You mean there's a bill, there's a law that says Tesla cannot have a...
They do, Tesla does direct sales. So direct sales, meaning that you can go directly to Tesla and buy, but they don't have showrooms. You can go and look at their cars, but they're not really showrooms, and they do direct sales, but they don't do them in Connecticut because our law prevents them from doing it.
You have to have a dealership model
Right.
to sell cars in. Yes. So
We're gonna see-
Lucid Technology wants to. I mean, their cars are coming
Rivian.
out. Rivian.
So the thing
these
is,
are just three.
but all of the current dealerships, such as Ford, you know, their Jeep, Mustang, I think, has an electric. I mean, they're all developing their electrics. So they're nowhere near where the Teslas are, or some of the others like Lucid and Rivian. But they just want to keep, it's a market competition. It's all it is.
They want to keep.
But-
They want to protect the dealership model, and I get that. But the marketplace is changing. And what's interesting
But
is
there's one other thing. The dealership model is based on motors and engines.
Yes.
And when you get what you essentially get with a Tesla or an electric car, you don't have the motors and engines. Like it was being explained to me that inside a Tesla, because I met with lobbyists too, we had speed dating. I had over 3 hours, every 15 minutes, I had a different lobbyist. And it's really speed dating. And they all come on a Zoom and you talk to them real fast and then they go off the Zoom. But what was explained to me about the issue that's going to really upend the dealership model is that every aspect of, say, let's just use Tesla because that's what we were talking about, is computer chips. The computer chips run the wheels. The computer chips run everything inside the car. There are no motors. There's not the whole, it's just completely, so the servicing, which is what a dealership is built upon, is not the same thing as what's going to happen when we move into electric cars. So it's going to upend.
Right, and the dealership model, what's interesting is it's shifting to what these new car dealers have, because instead of having stock of cars on the lot where you would come out and pick one, that you order your car and it's delivered to you. And that's the way almost all new car sales are going, which makes it cheaper for the dealerships because they don't have to pay the loans on those cars that they own in the lot. And it makes the supply chain much smoother because nothing moves unless it's sold. And so, again, if we want to stay on top with everybody else in the country and keep our economy going, we need to think about these new ways that people are doing business.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there one more from the floor?
How about guns? What will the legislature do this year on guns?
So the governor has put forth his agenda on guns, which are to further ban ghost guns, carry permits, not have concealed carry, assault weapons ban, safe storage. So currently with safe storage, if you live in a home by yourself, you don't have to lock up your gun. So if someone comes over to visit, children, whatever, that gun doesn't have to be locked. So safe storage and also further biometric locks on guns. So those are all the things that the governor has talked about, and they're already in the gun bills that are coming through. Did you have more?
No, it's all over the place still. I proposed a bill for liability for people who had a gun and it's used in a crime and didn't go anywhere, but there are people who are working to do that.
Thank you. If either of you have any kind of wrap-up concluding remarks, now is your opportunity, and then I'm going to give some thank yous.
So my wrap-up.
I'm going first. You
Okay,
started.
you go first.
I'll make it quick. First, I have a sign-up sheet in the back. If you want to get emails, I'll be glad to take them. And I send out email blasts about what's going on. Next phase of legislation, hearings are going to be ending. If you have not made your voice heard, do it now. Get it out there. Contact you're going to go from doing your hearing to your legislator. You're going to let your legislator know what you think is important and where to go. After that, those bills will be sifted and they will move in the next month to see what we're going to take to the General Assembly. Again, the next phase is to let your legislators know what you support and what you don't. And so the hearings are very, very important. I am so grateful for all the people who came to the different hearings that I attended. Some from Wilton, most are not from Wilton. But the ease of having, this is the first year that we had both in-person and Zoom testimony. And I think it's going to become the new model for how our legislature runs, because it opened up the doors for so many citizens to be able to testify, even if after midnight, it allowed people's voices to be heard, as well as actually show up at the State House. So keep us on our toes, hold us accountable. If there's something you don't like that we're doing, let us know. And if you want to know why we're doing something, we can answer that too. So the more people get involved in the process, the better it gets.
Well done. So same thing, if you want to know what's going on, email, sign up for my emails. I also just want to tell you, so if you go to cga.gov, cga.ct.gov, right at the bottom, there's a bill. You can put your bill number in, or you can go into it at the top and you can look at the committees, and all you have to do is click on any committee, and it will take you to public testimonies by dates, and it will take you to the submitted testimonies on that bill. And you can also see the process of the different ways the bill has evolved. So it is a fun website. If there's any issue that you really want, maybe not fun, but if there's an issue you really want to track, it's very easy to do. You just have to go in and fiddle around with it for a little bit, but you can find it. They're trying to make it as transparent as possible. And I echo what Keith said. Contact us. You know, I get emails all the time from people in the district. And if there's a bill they want me to vote on or pay attention to, then they send me an email. It's really important because, as I said, 40% of the bills get changed just because people cared enough to come and do public testimony. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your questions, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and the library.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I would like to just add to what Ceci just said. Each one of the committees does a newsletter. So if you're interested in housing, or if you're interested in transportation, or you're interested in elections, you just find the respective assembly committee that works on that issue, sign up for the newsletter, and you'll get a little summary every week of what's up, what's coming up, and how you can participate. Thank you all, especially our legislators, and all of you. Thank you for coming out on this uncertain weather condition day. Thank you both this morning for being so flexible about whether or not we're going to be able to pull it off. So glad we did. I also want to do a little shout out for 2 upcoming league programs that we would love to have all of you come to. On Wednesday, March 15th, we're doing a Tell Your Story panel with a number of Wiltonians who are serving on different town commissions or boards, including Board of Selectmen, Board of Education, Historic District Commission, Parks and Rec. That will be at Comstock at 7 o'clock. I'll send you a note. And then here at the library, Thursday, March 30th, we're going to be doing a town hall with Town Administrator Matt Knickerbocker, and that will be here in the Brubeck Room at 7 o'clock on March 30th. Thank you so much, and thank you to the library. Have a good, safe evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.